Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and I'm delighted to welcome back Richartd Swatton. Hello, Richard.
Hey, sorry,
You're,
I'm wearing this because it's a bit cold here in late November, and I'm up in my office, which we generally don't heat. So that's why I've got all this protection on, and perhaps also for the subject of today, because it's quite a heavy subject.
it is. You kindly have agreed to come and discuss this, I think, quite extraordinary book by Liz Greene, The Dark of the Soul, a psychopathology in the horoscope. And I think it is quite an extraordinary book because the it covers so many aspects of sanity and insanity. And
Mhm.
right at the start, you begin to, the way that Liz Greene talks um, draws you in to understanding the complexity of the human mind. And I begin with a quote here.
Yeah.
The majority of individuals who display psychopathic behavioral patterns do so under the guise of normal life. And I think that
Yeah.
that is at the heart of the subjectivity of the issue of sanity and madness,
Mhm.
which she then does this amazing job of unraveling through the book.
Mhm. Yes, I remember that quote very well, and um, it's such a complex issue, the issue of sanity and insanity, and what is normal. And she doesn't skirt around the issue, but typical of Liz Greene, she talks from both sides and does not arrive at a definite conclusion because um, what is sane may be insane in another context. So just to give, and I'll return to that quote in a minute. Yes, and I think that, you know, because films over dramatize and the papers over dramatize the most violent, insane, pathological, psychopathological people, we tend to think that it's um, uh, overblown with violence and murders and the rest of it. And of course, that is psychopathic behavior, but it isn't all of it. People, they used to call it, everybody has a psychotic pocket that they can tap into, which is a time when their mind just blows apart. They lose touch with rage or hysteria, or they go into psychopathological states. That's the borderline between so-called rationality and irrationality. And people cross that all the time, or can cross that. The other thing it used to be called psychotic pockets. You see, that's a nice term. That a person can adapt to a certain amount of life to appear normal. It's called a kind of average or superficial adaptation to life. You remember who was that murderer in North London? Uh, I can't remember his name now, but he held down an office job and went in and was normal, and but when he got home, he was inviting strangers round and then would kill them. I think that somebody wrote a book for him called Killing for Company,
Yeah, it's pretty
and I
chilling.
can't remember his name, but he was a psychopathic killer, and so people can retain the normal or apparently normal. And there's a side of them which is still steeped in infantile states. It's as if the adult development has not brought along with it certain what you might call pathological states in childhood, because an infant is always on the brink of survival, rage, abandonment. You see what I mean? And we all have that. This is a psychological point of view, of course. So we can all have that until the semblance of normality goes, or you touch a sore point, such as relationship. Relationship dynamics, I think, are at the heart of it, as shown by neuroscience studies and so on, that certain parts of the brains are not connected. The empathic part hasn't been connected while their person was young. And it's shown that certain nerve pathways in the criminally insane have not developed due to a lack of touch, due to a lack of empathy, sympathy, correct mirroring. That leads to narcissistic things. So the whole thing is a complex issue. And then there's the issue of what is mad and not mad. You see, she even touches on R.D. Laing, who was one of the great psychotherapists, psychoanalysts. He was a psychiatrist. He was, in the end, rather revolted by the psychiatric process of taking people into death through induced comas, insulin comas and all that, in order to shock them out. The shock treatment was the just wake them up. But he himself descended into a bit of addiction, could never get himself out of it. But he thought people went schizophrenic because of the environment, because of the mad people around him.
And
so believe that they were the mouthpieces. Actually, they were the victims of a certain madness already in society, which we can go into. So Liz Greene, she touches on the psychiatric, which is where she opens the book, the definitions of psychopathy and sociopathy and everything else. She then goes through the trait of a psychopath, which I've listed here. We can have a look at those. And then in the second part of the book, which is another lecture, she talks about sanity and madness. Yes. From an archetypal perspective. So she goes through the, some of the mythic deities and certain kinds of madnesses that Uranus might produce, or Neptune might produce, or Pluto, or even Saturn, or Aphrodite, the erotomania thing. So, the way people are going around stalking and everything else because they're obsessed by an internal image supported by a desire for sexual union. So she goes through that in a mythic dimension in the second half, which is amazing. And then in the last part, I can't remember the last part now. Oh, yes, that's it. It's the psychology of the scapegoat.
Yes.
Which is the madness of society who projects their problems onto groups or individuals and then gets rid of them. Anyway, so it's a very complex book.
It's an extraordinary book. And, you were talking about R.D. Laing. And what fascinates me about his work is that it's not so much later in his career that he comes to these conclusions. He comes to these conclusions very early on, because Sanity and Madness in the Family, I think, was written in the 30s, if I remember correctly.
I don't know. I don't know when the divided, so I don't know when these were written.
But he came to it very, very. And I remember reading that book at university, and it shocked me, because it was the first time that I read anything that presented the question of sanity or insanity as a subjective issue, and that I could see how somebody could be driven mad by others who seemingly are perfectly normal, but
apparently,
yes. And I've seen that time and again with some of my clients who are perfectly fine outside of the context of family or outside of the context of a very difficult work situation.
Yes.
And then become incapable of functioning when they're back in there. So it's, we have this word toxic that's bandied about a lot in our present society. But really, this is a kind of form of toxicity that we can see when, and this is the scapegoating part of the book, where she's talking exactly about this issue of how neat it is to just scapegoat and let somebody else carry the madness, so that nobody else has to actually take responsibility for their actions and what they are doing.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I would say there's, in certain groups, perhaps in society, there is a collusion, an unconscious collusion with a mad point of view. I happen to think that we're living through that at the moment. That there's a kernel of truth in all delusions, for example, and psychopathologies. There's a point to them, but the mass psychosis that can go on, and as you know, which is pushed by certain narratives on social media and the news and everything else, and we're told this is reality. This is actually one of the great psychopathologies of the present day, is what is truth and what isn't. Jordan Peterson, the rest of it, you know, they're talking about a post-truth world. You know, what is fake news? And this brings us down actually to a very important thing about image versus reality, because we see reality tendency through images, whether those images are words or we conceive through mental images, this constant dalliance with the screen, with the magic screen, with the illusions of fame and the rest of it. We're led down to believe what comes through this thing, and you know, lost touch with the senses. So this is a very big issue. Delusional reality, what's delusion? And I mean, what Lang was going on about was he was giving dignity to one of the ideas in psychodynamic psychology, is that sometimes madness is a sane reaction, if I could use it. And they've gone mad because it is an attempt to protect the individual from breaking apart, from a lack of survival. Patty Hearst is a classic example. You know I always go on about Patty Hearst, but you know, she got abducted, as you know, by, I think it was the Black Underground or the Black Panthers in the States, and she was a daughter of a millionaire or billionaire, and they wanted some money, see, and they were going to kill her. So they abducted her daughter, and she then went through a series of transformations in herself, which changed her attitude, which was so convincing that the gang now believed that she was one of them, so they didn't kill her. Do you see? So the psyche can absorb an environment and change and all that in order to protect itself. And she was only found, I think, in the mid-2000s, maybe in 2010, 2012, walking around New York in some kind of fugue state, and she had to be deculted. So do you know? But people thought she wasn't alive, and so on. So the psyche is capable of doing lots of things, including breaking the reality down in front of you, the believing in a delusion or something else, in order to save itself. Now, that's not a common idea in, I think, medical circles, but I've seen that it's true. I'm coming out to this is my 30th year. I worked for Mind mental health charity for 6 years, seen some of the worst cases imaginable. I worked for St. Thomas's Hospital for nearly 3 years in the psychiatric and psychotherapeutic departments, and my own practice. And I've worked with severe cases. It's not easy. You have to have a knowledge of yourself not to get trapped into the inherent whirlpool and thunder and lightning storms of a person's psychopathology. But some people want to be taken out of it, but that they've lost touch with, let's say, usual functioning, which can tell the difference between the inside of themselves, their fantasies, and the outside of themselves, which is actually a fundamental definition of what madness is. Is what I'm experiencing real, or is it or what I'm experiencing self-induced? Sorry, a lot. That was another long one, but you know, when we're talking about this subject, it's a fascinating one, but complex, as I said before.
It is extremely complex. And of course, what would we expect but for this to be the issue of our time when we have Neptune in Pisces?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens when it begins its sojourn into Aries, whether we'll, I wonder, whether we will become a little bit more tangible or whether we will take our collective psychopathy into the realm of Aries, which could be quite frightening, actually.
I tend to view it on the positive side at the moment. Um, I mean, it has its psychopathological side that, you know, as Liz Greene talks about Neptune, her famous book, The Psychology, the Astrology of Redemption, and that she sees Neptune as this idea that there's a great state of mind that redeems all suffering. You know, it's the highest ideal Christian mystics, and so we project Neptune onto savior figures and gurus and enlightenment states or ecstatic states where you know, drugged up and there's no reality but your own kind of inner cushioning. Those are all Neptunian, but I like the general trend towards Neptune being the projection of an ultimate state of reality in which you're saved, you're redeemed from suffering. And in Aries, that could be war. That is true. But I tend to view it as a reaction against the maybe last 20, 30 years where the outer planets have been in Aquarius, the redemption through the internet, through worldwide global communication, through satellite, you know, all of those kind of Aquarian interconnected net, that the idea that if we communicated as a global society, then somehow our mutual understanding of life shared would better us as a whole humanity. See, I think that's what the Uranus in Aquarius was, and definitely Neptune in Aquarius. But
And
as
they were
soon as
together.
Uranus hit Aries, what did we see? Oh, well, we, you know, in the Basque region wanted independence, didn't it? In Spain, there was all these things. We want independence. It was as if that was the next thing. So, without going wildly off tangent here, I think the Neptune in Aries will be the saving, is the preservation of the individual point of view
I agree.
rather than the collective point of view, which we all inundated with. We got to accept by media and image and, you know, this kind of um, soaking in of consensus reality, which we must all obey. No, the individual, and even if that individual hurts another individual, somehow that pain has something to do with the creation of boundaries. Pain, conflict, create boundaries. Don't go across here, which has been missing with Pisces and Aquarius. Anyway,
You know,
what do you think to what I'm saying?
I couldn't agree more. It is everything you've outlined about the prospect of Neptune in Aries is what I am looking forward to. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we can, wherever Neptune is, there could be an idealization that leads to a kind of madness in its own right. And that with Aries, as you say, that that could be war, and heaven knows that we are so close to that possibility. But ultimately, I think that the real war is going to be an internal war, which is about individuals reclaiming the right to be individuals.
Exactly. That's the
I
most
think that's
profound
very,
element of Aries.
and I think that's very necessary in our time. So, and it's just, you know, it's funny, isn't it? As we're talking about sanity, madness, and which is really about objectivity versus subjectivity and what's real and what's not real, the internal versus the external. And we naturally end up at Neptune's doorstep. And yet, as Liz points out, there are plenty of astrological or mythological, archetypal um, myths to explore here. Do you have one
Yes.
that stands out for you?
There are too many in the book. A lot of them. I think her association with the mythic deities are a way of enlivening the imagination into it rather than all of the technical terms of psychopathologies and the object relation school about how, object, part objects, projected self objects, love objects, all of this attempt to find a language in which to talk about psychopathology or psychological states. I think the mythic thing is what she does very well. But so no, no, not one that stands out. But I wanted to say something. You've reminded me of something that I think this book, for me, showed a a, a development of Liz's understanding 20, 30 years ago. See, I have all her books, and of course I'm a fan and everything else, and you can reread them and still get stuff from them because they're that dense and you didn't pick up something. And as you develop yourself with wider understanding or client practice, you go back to her and you can see how much depth she gets into it. So these books are to be put on the shelf, then got off of the shelf, and then I've read The Astrology of Redemption 3 times. I've read The Astrology of Fate at least 5 times, and I still get something out of it. Anyway, but I think this book shows a progression of her understanding, right from the Saturn Jupiter lecture. Have you got that one? The Jupiter
Yeah,
Saturn lectures, the
yeah,
Jupiter Saturn conference lectures, because there's a passage in there. It's just come back to me, where somebody asks her a question, and they say to Liz, "Oh yeah, but what about all that's happening in the world?" Speaking of the objective world, right? Wars and politics and people and personalities. And she says, "I don't understand that. What world? All I see are individual worlds." And I think she was in a very strong Jungian place then, a very strong internal psychoanalytic conception that most of the stuff, most of reality is subjective, and that it's going on in here, and we should attempt to change it here before we attempt to change it out there. And I'm kind of in agreement with that. But there was a kind of refusal of her, almost a. I don't want to go into politics. I don't want to go in there. I'm interested in the internal states, which is where reality exists, because we all have a chart. We all have preponderance of earth, air, fire, water, or certain things, and we perceive life through that. But I don't think perception is only of the psyche, you see. I personally don't. And in this, she finally admits or states that there is an external world to which we respond. And so her thing is, how do we? Is it is psychopathology an illness? Is it a given already in our character? Is it a character pathology which you can't change? Or is it an illness? Is it induced? And if it is, where's the cause? Is it in external people and situations that make you go crazy? Or, and as she says, it's a combination of three. It's a combination of your internal states already preconditioned, whether you see those as genetic or spiritual, and then you meet world. And in that meeting, in that conflict between self and world, if the world is not conducive enough, supportive enough, mothering enough, caring enough, guiding enough, then it can induce the worst. So she does admit that it's a combination between external environment and internal reaction.
But it
Do
has
you see
to,
what I mean? And I think that's
yes,
a change in her thinking, or
yes.
her admitting that the external sources of pressure, environmental pressure, um, are just as involved in this intertwining with personal subjectivity.
It has to be the case because this is a kind of dynamism that exists in our lives. We do not live, we are not at this point locked in a room by ourselves. We are interacting. There is an interaction. And I think, the other buzzword that's so prominent in of our time is co-creating. And
Mm-hmm.
when people are talking about co-creating, they're talking about a divine force. But if we're looking at it from a very pragmatic perspective, that divine force can really only be felt through the experiences that we have in our lives. And so this is the external experience, and the dynamic is between how we react and what we do in response to the external experience or external stimulus, if we want to see it that way. And this is life. This is how we live.
Yeah. Well,
It,
this is
that dynamic is
again,
strong.
it's not an argument that I've had with Liz, but the trend towards pure subjectivity has been something that I've the psychoanalytic is very subjective. So in a book like Relating, right, Guide to Relationships, so I think it was 1977, that one. Her first book was 1976. These lectures were given in 2000 and 2001. So there's a long interval of her thinking over time. She says that the horoscope can't tell you much about the objective situation. I don't, it's like if you've got Uranus in the fourth house and you project that onto your father, so your father appears to be uh, unstable, unique, sometimes there, unreliable, all those kind of classic Uranian things, like they're projecting onto Donald Trump because he has Sun conjunction Uranus. He's unpredictable, he's unreliable, nobody knows what he's going to do. It could lead to a disaster, it could lead to something, but he has Sun conjunction Uranus. So people are seeing real traits in him. It's drawing that out. So sometimes I have seen that the horoscope does describe the real environment, the actual mother, the actual father. And so we have this, but at the same time, if you have Sun conjunction Saturn, a Moon conjunction Saturn in your chart. It's one of the madnesses she talks about, the great fear of emotional aloneness, a lack of contact. No matter, and she makes the point that no matter how loving your mother was and how caring and cradling and so on, that one time that she says no to it or is in a mood, the Moon conjunction Saturn will take that as a total abandonment, and it will freeze up. Do you see? So there is a
Yes.
subjective factor to environmental conditions.
And I think that we could say that our own predispositions determine our reaction to circumstances.
Yeah.
And that might become a trauma. So, in my work as an analytical hypnotherapist, this is why we have this distinction that we hear people talk about, big trauma and little trauma. And so we have this distinction because the child can't always differentiate between something that is truly a rejection, or truly an abandonment, or a simple mum can't do that right now,
Mm.
and she'll be back in a minute. And so if a child is extremely sensitive um, to issues of abandonment, then they're interpreting
Yeah.
something as abandonment that mother did not intend in that way. And so
Yes.
this is okay. It's true. It's also part of that subjectivity. And so, if I'm working with clients who come because they've just had a baby, how do we handle that? And how we handle that is by saying, well, very sensitive. You might want to, take care and make sure that and so it's a very delicate thing, because we're understanding
Yes.
that the child has an innate predisposition, and we want to help nurture the strengths and support the weaknesses as much as possible.
Yes. Well, the moon Saturn is such a case. There's a predisposition to a rejection, emotional rejection, therefore emotional bonding, therefore trust in life, and you have to rely upon yourself. This is often the case with a moon Saturn square opposition conjunction. Um, but there sometimes is behind that a mother that was depressed, that was herself was ill or deprived of mothering herself, who is looking to the child to mother her, who maybe even had the child so that they could feel love, to belong to something. You see, so those are actual conditions. That isn't just a psychological state. This is what I'm trying to say. And knowing the difference is the child doesn't know. It just has experience. And then from that experience, it then produces a subjective reality that if I get close to anybody, if I rely upon anybody, if there is no unconditional love in the world, people don't do good things, you have to earn it. And that might lead to a tremendous self-supportive reality, uh, uh, facing reality as it is, and not to fall under the weight of emotional isolation, and so on. That can lead to great ambition. Noel Till pointed out in the 1980s that I think it was 80% of all American presidents had a moon Saturn square or conjunction, because to be at the top was to be totally lonely. There was nobody going, there was always an enemy. So it's not pathological in itself to have that. But what we're talking about here is, in therapy, I think, the person, in my opinion, often wants and needs their own subjective reality supported, because nobody has seen it. They haven't seen the abuse, they haven't seen the rejection, they haven't seen the dark rooms that they were in. And so sometimes there needs to be that, and then only later can you say, well, what can we do about that inwardly? You have to take care of yourself better now. You can't rely upon that. You can't go back and constantly say that was the case and stick in it. Do you see? So the archetypal perspective is that you're projecting onto that total rejection from the world, and if you stay in that mood, you'll never change it. So
Exactly. And that's the dance, isn't it? It's to
yeah,
see and to witness the pain that's there,
yeah,
and and understand it, and hold space for it, and then gently, to say,
yeah,
there's a doorway out of this. Can we begin to look to see it,
yes,
and find it? And I think that's the that's the healing that needs to happen. And yes, there's always, it's that fine line, isn't it, between predisposition and the sensitizing event, because there always
Yes.
is a sensitizing event. And sometimes the sensitizing event is not as big as it feels, and sometimes it's huge. And that
Yeah.
is also the teasing out of understanding and witnessing.
Well, it's the, she even brings in to this book Scott Peck, M. Scott Peck, and the problem of evil. How do we tell the difference between an ill person that has been made psychotic in a way by a terrible situation and inherent evil? In other words, there's nothing that can be changed in the individual. And I would almost define evil as a deliberate act of destruction, anti-evolution. It seems to want anti-evolution, anti-development. And Scott Peck was the first to produce, a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, to produce a book, People of the Lie. And she talks right a little bit about it in there. But then when the child is lied to, or they have that double Langian bind, behave yourself. I am behaving myself. I'm being naughty, right? So you got this, do you see what I mean? Children are naughty. They take things out. They say, behave yourself. Well, I am. I'm just being a 5-year-old. Do you see what I mean? So you get these double binds, or always tell the truth, and then the parent is always telling them lies. That, and then where is reality? So Scott Peck puts it down to the small amount of lies. Some of the case studies he's got in that book are incredible. They're incredibly terrible, where the identified patient, the person who's supposed to be mad and acting out, actually is responding to a terribly psychopathic situation, which the people don't know. But they're slowly killing their patients, or their children, or by killing their reality. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
By
absolutely.
them. So, does it exist within and without it, somewhere between the two?
It is almost impossible to avoid the notion of evil when we're talking about this issue.
Mm.
And so this is why we are talking about this amazing book. Just to remind
Yes.
you, it is called The Dark of the,
Dark of the soul.
and it's Psychopathology in the Horoscope by Liz Greene. And I hope that having watched Richard and I discussing elements of it, that you will want to go and discover more for yourselves. Richard, thank you so much for your time.
It's all right. Can I just say just one last thing? She makes the point very strongly. There is no astrological signature of madness. None. And she even, again, hovers that terrible, the difficult debating question. What changes one moon Saturn into a deflated emotional life, which then makes life difficult for other people and a kind of depression? And what is it that transforms that into a wonderful self-supportive ambition, which sees themselves tackling the world with great courage and fortitude? Both of those are concomitant of a moon Saturn, but the way that it might go is what makes it go one way into a constructive force, and what makes it go into a destructive force is yet to be known. We hope that looking at these things as therapists and astrologers, we might be able to nudge the situation into a more constructive life value.
Absolutely. And yes, it is actually one of the most common questions I get from my beginner students is, how can we tell, if someone's evil? How can we? And I say no. A chart is a chart. You see a chart, you see the chart of a human being, the human experience. and then there it begins. You begin to understand.
Yeah.
So it's a very important point that you reminded everyone.
Mm.
Uh,
So
of.
that's important, not to project onto astrology's measurements any of this stuff. But a good foundation book is The Sociopath Next Door. And it has a 13 point, I think, or a 16-point qualification about how to deal with people that you might feel are feel this way, and you feel under the pressure or you're afraid of, to protect yourself from. And Liz, in her own way, goes through, some of the tendencies, the tendency of a person to lie, to con you. There's a lack of remorse when they do anything wrong. There's no apology. They have a parasitic lifestyle on you. They're always wanting things. There's a lack of relatedness. They want to control the situation. Low boredom threshold. These are some of the clues which are a lot, and you have to be awake to them. I have a rule of three now after so much of this, and the rule of three: if somebody lets me down deliberately three times, they're on my watch list. Do you know what I mean? Because I can't, because there has to be some
It
level. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I
And the sociopath next door gives you a 16 point or 13-point list of behavioral things that you need to watch out for, lest you succumb to this to dangerous psychopathology.
and the idea of watching, I always say, eyes open. You have a sense that hmm, something needs. I need to keep an eye on this. This is
Yes.
something is not quite right. So yes, wonderful again. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay. Well, we must do it again at some point. Perhaps we didn't talk so much about the book as the very subject matter itself.
I think it's yeah, a book like this, you can't avoid talking about the subject matter itself, can you?
No.
Because everything comes from it. But yes, I think perhaps we can come back to the some of the archetypes at a
Yes.
later stage. Thank you. Um,
Okay.
if people want to find you and what you are doing, Richard, how do they do that?
Well, they need to contact me, and there are various ways of doing that through the LSA, through you, or people that know me. I prefer direct contact through the phone rather than email.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be putting a link to the LSA in the description box,
Okay.
as
Thank you very much.
as well as a link to the Wessex Astrologer so that you can find this book. Thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.